Breaking news out of our HQ studio. Steve Nash, the new head coach of the Brooklyn Nets, the team announcing today. The Hall of Fame point guard, an 8-time All-Star, is heading from the West Coast over to the Brooklyn Nets. Of course, the last 5 seasons, he's been in Golden State as a player development consultant there with the Dubs. 18 years in the NBA, illustrious career for the Hall of Famer. Phoenix, Dallas, and L.A., just a few stops along the way. 2-time MVP back in 05 and 06, 3-time All-NBA first team for Steve Nash, and of course bringing a lot of experience when you're talking about the point guard. And Kyrie Irving now there, Kevin Durant as well. A nice little team in the East and might make them a contender in 2021. All right, let's bring in our Raja Bell for more, our NBA insider. And Raja, your reaction to this news, Steve Nash heading to Brooklyn.
Yeah, I think it's a good fit. Obviously, Steve's very familiar with Kevin Durant, having spent time out there in Golden State, working with those guys. And Sean Marks, the general manager, played with both Steve and I in Phoenix, and so there's a relationship there. And obviously the vision that Marks and his staff has includes Steve and the way he sees the game, and he thinks that they will kind of be able to navigate the relationship between Kevin Durant and Kyrie better with a guy like Steve. Not that there's any problem with that relationship, but sometimes when you have, a coach in there who sees it through a point guard's eyes, he sees it through a leader's eyes. He's done it at a very high level. He can kind of relate to both of those guys and make sure that it just goes off seamlessly. So I think it's a good hire, and obviously the relationship there, helps play a part in it.
Nash becomes the 23rd head coach in Brooklyn history there for the franchise. And when we speak about Steve Nash, we remember back in the glory days, one of the best point guards at that time. And now he gets to handle Kyrie Irving, who is considered one of the best point guards in the game at this point. How would that relationship work between these two moving forward?
Well, I think it's going to be great. First of all, Steve is his skill set, his ability to see the game, his knowledge of the game. I think all of that is going to be great for Kyrie. And Kyrie's already well on his way to having a legacy of his own. But being able to pick the brain of a guy like Steve Nash and have him out there on your side is going to be critical. I think it'll really help Kyrie. And Steve is one of those guys that kind of gets along with everybody. Like, he will figure out a way to communicate. And when you're teaching, not everyone responds to the same stimulus. And so if you approach it that way, and that's the only way you know how to do it, well, you're going to have guys that buy in. Sometimes you're going to have guys that don't. Steve, as a leader, was a guy who kind of could relate to everyone, could kind of get on everybody's page, and I'm sure he'll do that as a head coach. And because he can do that, and he's so good, like I see in the game, those guys are really going to respect him, and they're going to play hard for him. He does lack experience, and I've talked to him about the experience in the coaching, and they know that, so they'll surround him with people, or at least they'll be targeting people who have experience that can help him navigate kind of the ins and outs of an NBA season for sure.
Talking about Steve Nash, of course, this is the first opportunity in the league as a head coach. Coming from Golden State, spent 5 years there as a player development consultant with the Dubs. That probably helped with Kevin Durant. We just mentioned that. How does that help KD as well? You get 2 stars in Kyrie and KD as well, but now Steve Nash there. How does that help KD in his development and maybe chase a championship in the future?
Well, I think just having someone who's super familiar with KD, the way KD works, the way KD wants to play, where he's at his best. I think having a guy that's really familiar with him like that is going to help put him in a position in Brooklyn to really be successful. Some guys, you see them from afar, and you break them down on film, and you can get a beat on what they like to do and how they like to do it. But sometimes it takes really knowing a guy, knowing what makes him tick, knowing what he really likes to do when push comes to shove, how to handle him in pressure situations to get the most out of him. Those things become really important, and at times can get you over the hump. And so Steve just has that familiarity with KD. Like, they've done it together before. And so, I think that's just going to be, put Brooklyn in that much better of a position to be successful right away when you put those two on the court together.
Part of that championship run there with the Dubs and KD, and you look at the roster breakdown, guys under contract. The Nets, of course, a lot of us may forget they were in the postseason this year. It was just a lot of guys banged up, but you got Herbert coming back. You got KD, Kyrie coming back as well, DeAndre Jordan, so a healthy roster. When you look at this makeup, adding Steve Nash to this, could they be a contender in the East next season?
Yeah, I think they could be a contender in the East for sure. I think they believe that. I know Steve believes that. He's pretty excited about that roster, and you have to navigate a lot of things, health first and foremost. But I don't have any doubt that Steve will go in there with an approach that guys will really appreciate. They'll build the family. He'll hold people accountable. He won't do it in a dictator type of way. And guys will play for him. Guys will respect the way he goes about his business. They'll respect his basketball IQ and his ability to communicate. And I think they'll be a good team. But they got to stay healthy. If you don't, that kind of just seals your fate. But if they do, yeah, I think they could be a contender in the Eastern Conference for sure.
Roger, you've played with Steve Nash before in your career. Based on what you know about Steve and knowing that most of us, we don't see the things behind closed doors, what he can do as a leader, back then as a player, what are some things that most of us may not know that can help him at the next level here as a new head coach at the Nets?
Well, I just touched on a few of them. Like I talk to Steve, relatively frequently, and he's just a really, really good communicator. And that when you're leading men, like that's first and foremost. You have to be a good communicator. He's a good human being. Like he cares about people. That comes across in his communication. And I think when you're dealing with stars in the league, letting them know that you don't just look at them as a person who can get buckets or rebounds is really important. He's going to care about them. He's very good at kind of establishing a family type of environment where it's a we attitude, not just a single entity, and getting guys to buy into that, holding them accountable. Even though he's a nice guy and he's kind of a player's guy, he's still going to hold you accountable, matter-of-factly, and keep it moving. And I think that culture, and if he can go in there and implement and establish it, it's going to be really beneficial for those guys, and they're going to have a great season.
I know I'm probably jumping the gun here and just looking at the way the East is made. The Nets now a true contender. I would think so at this point. What we're seeing now in the postseason with the Heat and also the Bucks. This is probably an ideal situation where Nash kind of comes in and you have the roster. When you look at it from the outside looking in, is there any way that I don't know, maybe that this could go the wrong way or go sideways a little bit? Not anything against Nash, but just, sometimes when you match that much star power with a name like a Nash, is there any way it can go sideways to the point where maybe it was too soon to make a move like this?
Well, there's always a possibility that things don't work out. Again, this is, in fairness, it's going to be Steve's first real crack at coaching at the NBA level. I am the camp that thinks he's going to do very well at it, but there's always a possibility that things don't work out well, and there's always a possibility, that it just doesn't work from a personnel standpoint, or it doesn't work from a, an injury standpoint. Like if it doesn't, it's not solely a Steve thing. I happen to think that it will, but you just touched, on the fact that the Eastern Conference is kind of, wide open. You have good teams, right? But I don't know that you have any great teams out there. And I've always been a believer that if you can put, two players of the Kyrie and Kevin Durant ilk together, get them to buy into playing winning basketball, like they're going to be a force to deal with, and there's going to be more firepower there than you have on most teams in the East. So I give them a chance against anybody. But in being fair, there's a chance that it doesn't work. But there's a chance when you hire anyone, Phil Jackson, that it doesn't work. Look how that turned out, in New York, albeit not a coaching gig, but it doesn't matter what your resume is. If you drop someone in or players into a situation and there's just one thing wrong with the chemistry there is always a possibility that it doesn't work.
We'll have to see how it pans out. I just think now they're a top three contender in the East now, along with the Bucks and even the Heat and others along in that Eastern Conference. All right, Roger Bell, appreciate your time tapping in on this news about Steve Nash as the new head coach of the Brooklyn Nets. Again, check it out. The team making it official on Twitter. The Brooklyn Nets have named Steve Nash as their 23rd head coach in franchise NBA history. Then a quote here, in Steve, we see a leader, communicator and mentor who will garner the respect of our players, one of the great on-court leaders in our game. I've witnessed firsthand his basketball a human and selfless approach to prioritize team success. Of course, Sean Marks there, excuse me. Let's bring in James Herbert for the breaking news here again on Steve Nash becoming the new head coach for your deal. And James, you, of course, are there in New York a lot. You go to a lot of Nets games. Your reaction to this news coming out?
By virtue of the fact I live in Brooklyn, it's great news for me. I mean, Steve Nash is, when he was a player, was always just an incredible player to talk to from a media perspective. You know, I grew up in Toronto. Like, I am of the belief that Steve Nash could do any job in basketball that he wanted to. He is, as the Nets said in their statement, one of the best leaders in the history of the sport. He can relate to the rookie that's coming in that maybe is not as highly touted and isn't getting as much playing time as he wanted. He can relate to a former MVP like a Kevin Durant. He has done just about everything that you can do in the NBA other than winning a championship. I am also just kind of shocked because he has been pursued in just about every capacity that he could be since he retired as a player. He chose to only be a development consultant with the Warriors, which was essentially a part-time job where he could kind of come in and work with the players, but he didn't have to go on the road. He didn't have to be at every practice. He always had so many other interests outside of basketball. He was somebody that, as a player, I just assumed he would be a coach when he was done. That's how he played. He was always one of the smartest players in the game, but when he stepped away, it seemed like this wasn't in the cards. So my reaction is one of shock and surprise, but also, I mean, if you had told me 10 years ago rather than 2 years ago that this was going to happen, then I wouldn't have been surprised at all.
For Steve Nash, Raja Bell just touched on a little bit what he did as a player, playing alongside him, a leader in that locker room, on the court. Your expectations, though, for him as a head coach now?
Yeah, I think his potential as a head coach is just sky high. I think we're going to have to see what this roster looks like as far as this sort of immediate expectations and what this Nets team can do. He is going to walk into a situation where, fair or not, I think people are going to assume that Brooklyn will be contending for a championship next season. Right now, if you look at their roster, they have 4 guys in Durant, Irving, LeVert, and Dinwiddie who are most comfortable with the ball in their hands. Some of them, you know, are more comfortable playing off the ball than others. I don't think they necessarily have to, like, completely, I'm not sure they're going to trade Dinwiddie and LeVert or anything like that. They could even go into next season with all 4 of them. Maybe the way LeVert played in the bubble was so impressive that they think, all right, this is another star that we have. And maybe Spencer Dinwiddie is totally fine with coming off the bench. He did tweet about that recently. So I just kind of want to see what everything looks like with the roster before I attach any kind of championship expectations to this next team with a first-time head coach in Steve Nash. But I'm sure from sort of the outside world, when they go in, like, people are going to be expecting a lot regardless of what the front office does to follow up this coaching hire.
Nash, of course, coming into a situation where you have maybe 2 of the top 15 players, top 5 with KD, of course, spending time together in Golden State in the past 5 seasons while he was there running to those championships. Now that he has it in his wheelhouse with the Brooklyn Nets, is Nash his final piece to possibly run at a championship this year and years to come?
I don't think he's the final piece, but he can absolutely, I think, be a crucial piece in what the Nets are building in terms of the culture that they want there, in terms of figuring out the offensive style that they want to use with Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving as the stars of the show. It's going to look very different than the Nets have looked for the past few years for very obvious reasons. And I think Nash, he knows how to build a great team. He knows how star players think. As I said earlier, he also knows how role players think, and he is a guy that will want everyone on that roster to feel comfortable and be in the right position to kind of be the best player that they can be. How it actually works out, I don't know. I'm not sure that today they have all the pieces that they would need, but they have some of the most important pieces, right? Like, if Kevin Durant comes back and is the Kevin Durant that we know, if he is fully recovered and he is, like top 2 or maybe the best player in the NBA, which is how he was playing with the Warriors the last time we saw him, then they actually have the potential to win a championship in fairly short order. I just want to see sort of what the team construction looks like. They have decisions to make with regard to potential trades of some of the up-and-coming players on the roster. They don't necessarily have the deepest roster in the world, although some of the sort of pickups they had mid-season, like a Timothé Luwawu-Cabarrot, did end up shining in the bubble. Maybe they're a little bit deeper than we thought a couple of months ago. I still think the front office has some work to do here if we're going to call these guys, a threat to win the championship next season. But Durant is healthy. They're going to be at least in the conversation, right?
Yeah, if you have KD, you're exactly right about that. But talking about this star power, sometimes it could be dangerous. Maybe too much can cause problems, or maybe losing streaks that extend, about 5 or 10 games. How important is it for Nash to kind of, get with his two stars in KD and Kyrie Irving to make sure this works and build that chemistry early on?
Yeah, I think one advantage that he has is that he and Kevin Durant already have a very good relationship. Like, when Nash was working with the Warriors, he wasn't your average assistant coach on that team. He would often be staying late after practices, working individually with Kevin Durant, working individually with Stephen Curry. But that is really when he got close to KD. They did a lot of work together. I'm sure they've had tons of conversations about the game and about how they believe it should be played. And it sounds like KD was a driving force in getting Nash to go to Brooklyn. I am not sure how close he is to Kyrie Irving, but I cannot imagine that we would be sitting here today talking about Steve Nash as the next coach of the Brooklyn Nets if he had not already started cultivating that relationship with Kyrie Irving. That is going to be extremely important. I think Kyrie Irving, I would assume, would love to talk to Steve Nash about basketball, would love to get on the court with Steve Nash. This is one of the greatest point guards in NBA history, and somebody who I think could probably relate to Kyrie Irving on a lot of levels. And when you talk about where Kyrie Irving's game could go, honestly, Nash is somebody who I think he could probably learn from. Kyrie Irving is one of the best one-on-one players in the game, just a kind of spellbinding player with the ball in his hands looking to score. But I think his entire career, people have been talking about, his critics, I should say, have been talking about sort of like, can he make his teammates better at a higher level than he does now? He is so skilled. He is so talented. But it has always mainly been about him getting buckets. If he can really leverage that ability to make his teammates better in a more comprehensive way, if he can be a little more Nash-like, not that he's going to completely change his game, then I think maybe that elevates the Nets a little bit more. They have so many other weapons as they're currently constructed. Again, that construction could change between now and the start of the season, but I think it is sort of a natural place for Nash to wind up when you look at the roster.
Once again, the Brooklyn Nets find a way to do a little bit better than the Knicks in New York, claiming that title as the Kings of NY. James Herbert, appreciate your time championing on the news of Steve Nash as the new head coach of the Brooklyn Nets. Once again, the team are making it official on Twitter. The Hall of Famer, point guard, and Steve Nash, an 8-time All-Star, heading out from out west to the East Coast in New York to be the new coach of the Brooklyn Nets.
Want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis. No yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.